been a lot of discussion, certainly on my Twitter timeline this week, about the lack of racial diversity in women's football, and I toyed with whether to do this video or not, because frankly, who wants to listen to the white guy talk about racism? But I guess the reason I'm deciding to do it, and I might regret it later, I might look at this in an hour, a week, a month, a year and think, oh God, I shouldn't have done that. And I'll give you an example of that. Last year we did a podcast on the Arsenal Women Arsecast with Natasha Henry, Anne-Marie Batson, and of course our co-host Pippa, about kind of lack of representation for black women in women's football media. And I asked them all on the show to do that, and I've kind of wrestled with that a bit subsequently and asked myself, should I have done that? Should I have, asked 3 black women onto the podcast to say, hey, can you guys talk about racism again for us? Thanks very much. Particularly because, it must be incredibly draining and probably a bit traumatic as well, because obviously the thing I have to lay out at the outset of this video is that I have never and will never experience racial discrimination in any form, overt, subconscious, etc., etc. So I don't have any personal experience to bear there. I am a 38-year-old white heterosexual male, relatively middle-class upbringing. I've got privilege written through me like a stick of rock. But one of the things I do want to bring to the video and that I do want to talk about is that in another life, in another career, I worked a lot across diversity and inclusion. I've been a diversity officer. And obviously that does not make me an expert, again, on people's lived experience, but there are some things that I've learned from doing that role over many years and working in that area that I think I'd like to go over. And the first one I learned is, well, not the first one I learned, but something important I learned was not to be paralysed by fear of getting things wrong, because I saw that a lot in the role, that very well-meaning people who wanted to be allies, who wanted to help, were kind of paralysed into thinking, oh, but how do I do it? How do I talk about it? What do I do? And then ended up not doing anything because they were paralysed by that fear. And so that's why I've kind of gone ahead and done this video. The other thing I learned really quickly was don't be defensive when talking about or being asked about things like your white privilege. Now, my life wasn't always easy. Growing up, there were things that made my life difficult, just like most other people, and lots of other people who've had much more difficult lives than I've had. But I think acknowledging that every single one of those things that made my life difficult or challenging would have been even more challenging had I been an ethnic minority, had I been black, Asian. I'm not even debating that as an opinion. That is just a fact. It is an absolute fact. It shouldn't be a fact, but it's a fact. And one of the things I learned was not to be defensive talking about that, not to feel attacked, not to feel like that's necessarily my fault, but to acknowledge that I've benefited from it. And so I kind of wanted to put all of that at the top of the video. The other thing that I really learned as well from kind of doing that role and working in that area is that underrepresentation in any area, whether you're looking at disability, socioeconomic background, race, gender, sexuality, underrepresentation is never an accident. Never, never, never. I am so sick and tired of reading comments on places like Twitter. I'm very aware that this is going on YouTube, and there will almost certainly be YouTube comments that will say things like, oh, well, maybe black girls just don't really want to play football. And I hear that kind of thing all the time. And it's just never the case in my experience. It is never the case that people don't want to participate. If people are not participating in big numbers, it is because there are obstacles and barriers, be they visible, invisible, physical, around attitudes, prejudice. There are barriers. That is why you get underrepresentation. And I think another thing that people really miss when you talk about things like representation, it's not just about what's fair and what's right, although that frankly is a good enough reason to have these discussions and try to solve these problems, because they are problems, they are issues, they are problems for all of us. And what people miss is when you look at, for example, the England women's team, okay, I'm going to quote some statistics from BBC journalist Miriam Walker-Khan. I will link to an article, several pieces of work actually she's done in this area, around what the makeup of the England Lionesses squad has been like. So she kind of put in her piece, there were 2 non-white players in the England Lionesses squad at the 2019 World Cup, down from 6 in 2007. So things happened since 2007, and nobody should think that 2007 was some kind of equal paradise, but things have happened clearly since 2007 to take that number down, and we can talk a little bit about what some of those things might be, but again, that is not from my lived experience. Now, in the men's 2018 World Cup squad, there were 12 non-white players, 2 versus 12. I mean, that illustrates very clearly, just at one level, the absolute elite level, that there is a representation drop-off. And where you've got that, there are reasons for it. And we all need to talk about, and not just talk about, but act on why those reasons are. So I think, but like I said, sorry, it's not just about fairness. It's about, we're denying ourselves talent when we do that, when we create these barriers and obstacles, or when we're not aware that these barriers and obstacles are there and we don't do anything to remove them. We deny ourselves talent. It is undoubted, absolutely beyond doubt, that there are brilliant female black footballers out there who, in a more equal kind of environment, would have been playing for England, who are lost. Okay, that's a talent drain. It does not make any sense to have that. You look at the England team at the moment that won the Euros. They won the Euros. They're one of the best squads in the world. They'd be even better if there was equality of opportunity. They'd be even better. Mathematically, there is no chance, when you look at the kind of the racial construction of England, there is no chance on earth that 21 of the 23 players who went to the 2019 World Cup would be white. And I believe that that figure was 20 out of 23 for the Euros. There were 3 mixed race players in that squad. There is no chance that is the case. There is, mathematically, that would be absolutely, it would be just unreal if that were the case, that that's what the actual talent looks like. Okay, so we're losing that talent, and we have a responsibility to try not to lose it. It benefits us all. But like I said, the fairness aspect is still, that's still good enough reason in its own right. I think another one of the things I learned kind of doing the diversity officer role, and something I had lots of conversations that really stuck with me, and one I kind of want to bring up. I was talking to, I'd been at a conference and I was talking to a wheelchair user, and this gentleman, he wasn't born disabled. He was in an accident, paralysed from the waist down, and he was in a wheelchair. And I mean, first of all, the thing he said to me was, we're all a second away from being in a wheelchair, or we're all a second or a phone call away from having to care for someone in a wheelchair. You know, no one thinks it's going to happen in their life, but it could. But the thing he said to me was, okay, my legs don't work anymore, but they've given me a chair with wheels on it. So actually mobility is not an issue. My mobility issue in and of itself has been solved by having a chair with wheels on it. So he said, I can get around, no problem. That problem is absolutely solved. And the phrase he kind of used was, if the road is flat and clear, I can go even faster than I did when my legs were working. And the phrase he used that's really, really stuck with me, he said, I'm not disabled, the environment around me disables me because of lack of accessibility for wheelchairs, because a lot of our kind of environment just isn't built to accommodate them. And that phrase really stuck with me when he said, I am not disabled, my environment disables me. And I thought about it and I thought, isn't that true of most forms of prejudice and most of the barriers and obstacles that people face? That the issue is not with the individual, it is with everything and everyone around them, be they personalities, be they structures, be they kind of ways of thinking that have become ingrained in us as a society. And And so when you look at some of the reasons that, again, people who have personal experience of this kind of thing around the lack of kind of racial diversity in women's football, so things like regional talent centres being closed in inner cities, for example. So Danielle Carter, who plays for Brighton, played for Arsenal for many years, came to the Romford Regional Talent Centre. It was closed. The Regional Talent Centre that Drew Spence came through in West London closed. And most of them are kind of moved out to, you know, places like where Arsenal train, Colney, Hertfordshire, or where Chelsea train, Cobham in Surrey, in these kind of leafy suburban places that aren't as racially diverse. And therefore, I mean, you look at the Arsenal squad, for example, it's very white as well. And there are reasons for that. It is just not the case that the talent isn't out there, or that girls from North London and Islington don't want to play football. It's because there are barriers and obstacles that prevent them from doing that. And not all of them are things like unintended, I guess, consequences of closing regional talent centres, because again, when you listen to black women, Asian women who talk about this, like, a lot of them will tell you they have experienced much more overt discrimination than that. And you look with the England team as well in 2017, you know, the England manager, Mark Sampson, was basically sacked and was investigated and had to apologise for making racially discriminate remarks to black players. That was 2017, and which, by the way, might have contributed to this talent drain as well, when, you know, when black women and black girls are seeing that this is happening in the England squad. I mean, it would stand to reason if that put people off playing. So, you know, it's not just always about structures, unintended consequences, unconscious bias. Some of it is quite conscious and overt, and I think we shouldn't shy away from the fact that that's the case. And I don't know if people have read Alex Scott's book recently, but Alex, she talks about how she felt racially profiled when she was younger, when she was training. She talks about how she was very nearly expelled from the Arsenal Academy over perceived attitude problems. I don't think she says in as many words, to be fair, and it's not for me to put words into her mouth, that was a kind of a racial thing. But you know, these are clearly barriers and obstacles that black women and girls face in women's football in particular. And it's really kind of incumbent on us to, like I said, not just talk about this, but to acknowledge this and really, really try to tackle it. And I know that bodies like the FA, for example, are very, very aware of this, and they're kind of coming up with programs and talent programs and things like that, trying to fix the gap where regional talent centres were closed. But I think basically, and there's only so much a lot of us can do to affect those kind of things, but I think basically some of the things I've learned and I'm still learning about are about not being defensive, about things like white privilege, about listening to people of colour who've gone through these things and have seen those barriers and obstacles erected, and just kind of not being defensive about it, but also understanding that there is a benefit to all of us when there is equality of opportunity. We all benefit from that. Our football teams would be better, for example. So again, that's not the main reason, because it's not even just about girls who might play for England. It's not even about girls who might play professionally. You know, people who just want to play, who want to play five-a-side, who want to play Power League, who want to play amateur, who want to play with their friends or whatever else. Like, everyone has the right to do that. And we shouldn't pretend that there aren't barriers and obstacles around that. And like I say, I've never experienced any of those barriers personally. But I guess I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things I've learned either from listening or from working in this area, and that I'm continuing to learn. And I think we all owe it to ourselves and others to continue to be curious about this, to continue to surface this discussion, and to continue to demand action in this area.